And acknowledged. Come on. There we go. Good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Johnson, and we're here for another Close the Distance holiday edition. We're doing some get-togethers between me and a couple of my best friends in the intelligence world. Eric Garland. Good morning, Eric. How are you?
Morning, sir.
We have a limited amount of time before you have to pick up your children. So I'm going to get us underway here, and then Monica Nixon will be joining us very shortly. Did you have a nice Christmas, first of all?
Very merry.
All right. Well, we're coming to you on Monday, December 27th, 2021. Close the Distance is a little thing I started last year during the sort of depths of the pandemic lockdown, together with some economic development leaders around the state of Wisconsin. And my promise to myself a year ago was that I was going to bring Close the Distance back as a live stream in 2021. And I realized on about the 20th of December that that's now. I better do it really, really toot sweet quickly. So
you got too many days.
And Eric, you are helping me keep that promise to myself. So as we're doing this together, and you're going to come back after kids are sorted, but we are going through the contingency control factors that define our macro environment, otherwise known by the moniker STEEPLED: social, technological, economic, ecological, political, legal, ethical, and demographic. And today, P is for politics. And so there's nobody else I'd rather talk about politics with than you, my man, because I spent 4 years at UW-Madison getting a degree in political science. Politics taught me one thing, is that you get dumber the more political you are. So I am apolitical. I would actually describe myself as a constitutional anarchist these days. And so with that,
I'd say that makes you supremely political. I mean, because we're talking about how does the polis, the group of, how do people run themselves? How do we all get along? We all agree that working in tribes or organized situations is better than lone primates out in trees and on the prairie. And last 10,000 years we've been doing the city building thing. How do we do that? What are the rules? Do we have any rules? Otherwise, it's might makes right. And I think constitutional anarchy is just a form of politics. I think we have a political dialogue that is very that's controlled in a certain way, and it represents history of certain traditions. And I think intelligence people reject politics, and I reject certainly partisanship because we look behind the images and the PR narratives that are put out by everybody. That can be nation states, that can be politicians, that can be corporate marketers. We look behind that, and it is hard to. I think what is considered political in America is not just what policies you put out, but is your adherence to and your willingness to use a certain dialectic that has been very carefully chosen by political operators and electioneers and whatnot. And I think some of those narratives are so bereft of the truth that intelligence people have a profound disrespect for it. When you look at what's known as the left-right spectrum, which actually, do you know where left and right came from? The French monarchy, I think whenever the king would visit Parliament, I believe, they would have his most loyal on the right and the opposition to some of his policies on the left.
Gotcha. I didn't know that. Learn something new every day.
Hence left and right. However, what the hell does that mean? To be in opposition. Now they only stayed a constitutional monarchy for not very long before they started lopping heads off.
Yeah.
It apparently didn't work too good. And around that time you had the rise of the merchant class. If you've ever seen what is it, Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, the Bourgeois Gentleman, which is about it's a Moliere play, so 16th century or early 17th, I believe, where they're dealing with the rise of the power of people who've made money not through rent from land and title, but from commercial activity, and they've that class started getting in the face of a lot of the traditional monarchy and aristocracy in France, and of course they had an empire that went along with it, and so did their cousins, the British, and their empires fought, and then the French thought it'd be really funny to finance their American rebels and make rock stars out of their freest, most anarchos without a prince. So they helped us be constitutional anarchists, our friends of the French. They're like, oh, you don't want a prince, i.e. King George, and you do want a constitution. I mean, we're not going to do that here, but awesome. And so they supported us even before, it got military. They were printing Tom Paine and Thomas Jefferson, and they had, we had a great relationship. And then when we got fighting with the actual English crown, the French dumped men, money, materiel, galleons, men of war, ships of the line, and helped blow their imperial rivals off of our shores. We couldn't have done it without them. That's for darn sure.
They financed an insurgency against their historical hegemonic rival in Western Europe.
Yep, and then after that, they had like a victory tour where they had, they had Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and others. I am especially into Tom Paine, because apparently the dude talked with his mouth full of food and yelled and was drunk and stinky, and they're like, oh, he's really like, no, the dude's like, the Sunshine Patriot will cower. Let's shoot these guys. And he wrote Common Sense. He was a common man, and they're like, oh, he really is very common. And they published all these pamphlets from these guys, and the local population there was like, right on, yeah. And oddly enough, the French monarchy was starting to go, where we got a problem with infrastructure here. Because London has about as much power as we do, but it's way cleaner. Remember, a lot of the aristocracy would have family back and forth, and then a lot of these guys would know London, and they're like, it's clean, it doesn't smell as bad, they have lighting, it's safer. And here, Paris is just a whole lot of horse dung and dirty water and not a lot of public facilities here. And oddly enough, about a year before the French Revolution in 1789, they decided to have Infrastructure Week. So that was 1788. There they did a big old bipartisan infrastructure bill in France, because they're like, these people are going to go nuts here, and especially because it's not that nice here. And then there had been populist uprisings, and the gendarmerie was putting it down pretty hard, and then chance intervened, which was a canicule, which is French for a heat wave, and it was one of the hottest years on record. I believe it was scorching starting in April or May of 1789. It whacked the wheat crop. It drove the price of bread super high. And by the summer of that year, it was stinking of fecal matter, and bread was twice what it was, and people were, protesting, and the gendarmerie pressed down hard. And it got to about July 14th of that year, and they finally put one guy in the Bastille too many. And when they snapped, man, it was for real. They, if you ever read the stories of how it went down, like, the crowd literally ripped the gendarme limb from limb, kicked their heads down the street like soccer balls.
That's quite an image.
What's that?
That is quite an image of Bastille Day, the first Bastille Day.
And so, something I of course, I started my career in Paris in '95, and every time I would walk by the Bastille there's a roundabout in the 11th arrondissement, and there's this big copper tower. That's the monument to the Bastille. And I thought it's funny. Americans, we have these great temples, and they're gorgeous. I also one of my homes away from home is Washington D.C., my intellectual home, and there we have these gorgeous marble temples to Thomas Jefferson, Lincoln, Washington, all that. And I was struck. I was like, wow, we have these temples to our leaders, and here they have monuments reminding their leaders that we'll cut your head off. And they drive around every day. They just watch it like, yeah, don't forget, it's still on the table. But that whole idea of who are we going to have in charge here? The struggle goes on, and I think a lot is not we could go in any number of directions on politics, but I think the problem, if we're going to make this broad enough for an entire audience, we got to teach civics again. We got to teach how people got into this position to begin with. I mean, how does any country come about? Much less this one. And of course, we have an audience in Canada and elsewhere here. How did Portugal come about? How did Canada come about? They're all different stories, and everybody's trying different things. But you and I live in the United States, and people are real big on political opinions, but not real big on politics, as in what is the structure of these things, and how do we, what is their role to be in our lives? And I think we have, we kind of deadened that part of Republican life, the life of a republic. We outsourced so much of that thinking to a political class that then started doing things kind of on a hereditary basis. I currently live in the state of Missouri, and there's a few, 3, 4, 5 families that boop, 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 right down the line. Dad's a senator, the kid's a governor, the other kid's a lobbyist for a while after he was Secretary of State, and wash, rinse, repeat. They might be from different parties, but it's like, that's really reminiscent now, isn't it?
Right on. Monica, welcome. You got here just in time, and keep talking, Eric. I've got to rename Monica because she came in with your link.
We can't do that. We can't have. We were just talking about how people don't teach civics no more, and how the French Revolution happened because of horse manure stinking in a heat wave.
I see.
Revolutions are built when things are stinky.
And so Eric was awesome. And what Eric did there was he gave us kind of the historical underpinnings of what really politics and political perspective entails. And we started kind of with right, left. Eric, I know you've got to take off and pick up the
a few. I'll be back.
All right. And then you'll be back. But Monica, just to bring you up to speed on things. Thank you, by the way. Monica, tell our audience who you are.
Well, I'm not sure. This morning I'm a little tired.
Well, hopefully Christmas was nice for you and your family.
It was. My name's Monica Nixon, and I head corporate strategy for Vanguard Integrity, which is not the mutual fund company, but the cybersecurity company. We focus mostly on identity management and governance-related solutions for mainframes in government and, other large banking type accounts.
Perfect. Well, politics, I think, from the standpoint of where we are both as a country, but also as a world, is one of those, gnarly domains that people get irrationally emotional about. And I'm not emotional. Well, I'd like to say I'm not emotional about it but I probably am deceiving myself in saying that, very statement. But people lose their damn minds when they start talking about politics because of all these party affiliations. And that's one thing that Eric touched on a second ago, which was partisanship. The notion of partisanship has become really, really, really repellent to me personally, because it forces you to give yourself a frontal lobotomy in order to participate. And I think that's part of their strategy. Is it attracts the stupid and the foolish and those who lose their damn minds over teeny little things that really won't matter in the long, larger stage. But Monica, I want to give the mic to you for a second here. What's politics, I guess, as a control factor, as a domain that you have to cope with as an intelligence analyst? What's that mean to you?
Well, I actually had more experience with that more directly in a previous job that I had that I think I'd like to relate here. It really taught me how exactly what you're talking about. Maybe my view's slightly differential, but while I see that, yes, there's this huge division that has been fostered in the forcing of people to take sides and so forth, and I agree with you completely, it's made people stupid and non-thinking. One of the jobs that I had, let's see, about 12 years ago, I worked for a small startup with intelligence-related software that ultimately got sold to one of the agencies. But I saw how the game worked, because what they really hired me to do was to profile members of, let's just say, certain technical committees for influence. And this was back when Facebook was young. And, everybody was using directed web crawlers and scraping and starting to take, the behavioral ethnographer angle and how to profile people. So, like I think I mentioned before, kind of a precursor to what you've seen them do with Palantir, what you've seen them do with Cambridge Analytica. But getting back to the political angle of that, it was highly, highly political. The privacy related angle, and there was like the pro IP bill at that time and so on and so forth. I think that was one of the privacy related bills. I can't remember. Maybe I'm off base there. But what I came to realize very quickly is all this partisanship, like you said, is largely just window dressing to keep all of us polarized. And most of the people in DC, frankly, don't care as long as the money's coming from somewhere. And I wonder how broadly the American populace really realizes that sometimes.
Yeah. What's funny is we've had some Russians kicking around in our political lives, really for 100 years. I mean, their election interference goes back, or their election influence goes back to 1917, 1918. As soon as the Communist Party went, Comintern, they're like, no, this is global. We want everybody involved in this. By the time Stalin came around, they're like, we've got to cool ourselves out here. We're looking a little obvious. But in the last 4 or 5 years, because we had a guy who was so connected to the Russian Federation, as well as Ukraine, Israel, China, other places, but because you have Russian intelligence in there, they're the masters at this stuff about getting people to fight. That if you are busy fighting each other, then you're not going to be paying attention to the people who are ripping off everything that ain't nailed down. Right. And that's known as horseshoe theory in Russian military science, where you push everybody out here onto what's perceived to be the left, or here on the right, and then you put agent provocateur in the middle and get people to fight, and you use a technique called provocatia. You take the images and the cultural ideas that are the most that bring out the most emotion, and make that the subject of discussion. And instead of, so where are we going to put a road? How much is it going to cost? Or are we going to, let's install this kind of technology. Well, which way should we go here? And who's going to be the vendor on that? And, what's the tax, what's a good tax rate here to juice our economy? If you are ready to, ideally in their case, for them, ideally, if you're willing to shoot each other, they love that. And I'm not saying the Russians are behind all of our politics, but there's no question that they're, by their admission, they've been poking around here. But also, there's people here who have had 100 years to look up to the masters. They are legitimately the best at this stuff. And, you can't say it's not happening. But I would agree with Monica that, a lot of partisanship is window dressing for money. And the best way to obscure that is to make everybody believe that they're on different teams, instead of, you're not part of a very small team that's getting all the money and paying none of the taxes. So,
By the way, go get your children. Come back.
I know.
All right. Great points, Eric. Thank you. That's awesome. Well, I think from a political standpoint, a lot of our clients are business people, corporate decision makers, and folks who are trying to deploy capital, so to speak, against opportunities and threats from their operating environment. And so, what Eric just described around the Russian sort of influence peddling operation that we sort of put on steroids when Facebook became the way in which we're going to sort our opinions, and weaponize our opinions. Facebook basically weaponized our most conceited versions of ourselves. I'll put it that way. We became these demonic forces in one another's lives rather than family or friends or some dude I went to high school with. Suddenly their ideas are so hostile to my ideas, so anathema to the way I see reality, that they must die. And I'll use the example of one of the things I've been watching closely is how many people have been uninvited from Christmas because of their vaccination status. Bless you.
Mm-hmm.
Bless you.
Woof.
And
yes, you're right.
I've noticed that people have been sort of like, oh, well, I guess, I'm vaccinated. My unvaccinated mom and dad don't want me for Christmas, or vice versa is usually more the case. And I think what we're seeing now is the narratives are starting to struggle. The narratives, particularly around that subject, and I probably just made a big mistake by saying that word out loud because YouTube's going to turn our live stream off. But that particular subject has become the way our culture seems to be sorting the sheep from the goats, so to speak. Thoughts on that?
Oh, I have plenty, and you can rest assured as they're going to pour out here that your stream is going to get canceled, because you and I have had some private offline conversations. I think our thinking here is very similar. So relating this to the political, let's start there. People who have chosen for medical related reasons, personal autonomy related reasons, common sense, whatever, that the narratives weren't staying the same and weren't buying what was a lot of not science at all. And we see Fauci come out and claim he is science, to which he was finally, addressed by the scientific community as, who the hell do you think you are to make such a pronouncement?
Right.
But let's rewind that back politically. Okay. When this whole thing kind of kicked off, you had, Eco Alliance, or whatever it's called, Peter Daszak, if that's the correct way of saying his name, as all this started spilling out, as to how dangerous this thing was or not, and that the CFR ultimately, what are they saying it is now, Eric? 0.7?
Pretty low, pretty dang low, and pretty predictable.
Pretty dang low. But we fired up this whole thing of, oh my God, everybody's going to die. Daszak was the first one that, came out and started talking about this and trying to get in front of it. He wrote the first article that went into the Lancet, which kind of set the tone for everything. Well, isn't that convenient? A guy who was messing around over there running this lab, and, and then all of a sudden we don't talk about, and we shut down the investigation that was over there. But turns out, not only did he get in front of it, with that article and control popular opinion to a certain degree, which no doubt was purposeful. People like you and I know that. Turns out he was the fact checker for Facebook.
Ooh, yeah.
On all of the COVID related matters. So, yeah. And then you look at how precisely did it come to be? And, I have done some independent projects in pharma. I have a little bit of an understanding, about timetables and how things work and the commercialization of drugs. 108 days and they had a vaccine.
Yeah.
That stuns me a little bit. And that the conversation seems to have gone completely dead. Even though there's been numerous pieces that have come out, obviously not in the mainstream media and this, that, and the next thing. If you look for them, you'll find them, that other nations have done. We probably have too, as to the origination of this, its design, if you will, and numerous virologists and so forth saying it's too perfect. This didn't exist in nature. Well, I think that should have become pretty obvious to everybody. This didn't come out at a wet market, and the story has changed and changed and changed. And God, how many other things about disappearing files and very other interesting things about that Wuhan lab, not to mention our role in funding it, and for quite some time, not to mention, in the FOIA dumps and this, that, and the next thing, that I think we knew we were playing with fire. And yeah, and so here we are, and you're absolutely right. It has just shredded the social fabric and polarized and put people in two different camps: the people who will be vaccinated, the people who won't, the people who won't. I do see it changing, though, that there is a segment of people that are waking up and going, wait, we've been bullshitted here.
Right.
The narratives have changed too many times. And then you throw, the hospitals, well, they're all packed. Oh my God, it's just terrible. And a lot of that was whole cloth fabrication in many cases. So, and those people, I won't mention names, but I have a very good friend who runs a large hospital network. And, yeah, she's very careful about what she says, but it just simply isn't how it's being personified. That in some cases, when the hospitals and everybody was panicking and this, that, and the next thing, yeah, they were full. Okay, fine. But it's like she said, they should send these people home because most of them don't need to be here. And it's more dangerous for them to be here in this environment than to be back at home.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess I have some pretty strong sentiments, as I think you do, about this whole thing, that if we would have handled it in a different way, maybe just let it run its course, which I think we're finally getting down to admitting, and to quote Fauci, the science is starting to indicate clearly that had we just let nature run its course, that we'd probably be through this thing now.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole role of the vaccine in this. And there is a growing segment of people that think that, the vaccine itself is, well, I think you know where I'm going with this.
Right. You don't have to say it.
I don't have to say. And and that so much of what we're seeing now, these vaccine reactions are extraordinarily horrific for some people. And again, realize I have small sample. I don't know how broad the samples are growing. Well, I do. There's been some that people have culled the vaccine adverse reaction database. And some other people have said, if we'd ever had this volume of adverse reactions on any other vaccine, they'd have pulled it off the market. Well, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So I'll just close with that and let's hear your thoughts.
Well, it's funny because I've been tracking the data around the Omicron variant in the last probably 4 weeks, I guess it's been, maybe 4.5. And the thing that I've sort of been telling people is that I think Omicron is the live attenuated vaccine that I've been waiting for. And in many ways, it's exactly the traditional vaccine technology that's been sort of missing from this dialogue for the last little over a year. And just at the time that you see a couple of antivirals coming out from two of the largest biopharmaceutical companies in the history of mankind, Pfizer and Merck. I understand the nickname for the Pfizer drug is Pfizer-Mectin, and the nickname for the Merck drug is Ivermectin. So I think
you can't make this up.
I think it's just hysterical. And of course, these aren't nicknames that I would endorse or anything like that. There's similarity in terms of the mechanism of action around spike protein antagonism to the ACE2 receptor, notwithstanding all of that sort of stuff and how that all works. There's a lot of other stuff that particular compound does differently and sort of keeps this thing guessing. Three of the people that I've been sort of looking to as subject matter experts, because they're skeptical, and that by the way, is I think the intelligence saying, bless you, the intelligence saying it's probably, I'm Omicron at this point, Monica. So you may have just been vaccinated with that live attenuated vaccine you've been waiting for, if you're like me. The whole nature of what intelligence is about skepticism. Intelligence is about not believing anything without evidence. And the evidence-based conclusions that I have drawn, and there's this threshold, and it's a threshold of uncertainty. Until you defeat that threshold of uncertainty, you're a fool to do anything. You're completely foolish to run out and do something because it makes you feel better. You know, it's
more that you're guilt tripped into virtue signaling that you have gone with the herd. That you're a bad person because you won't do this, and you don't care about other people because science.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So the three most influential skeptics that I have been following are Robert Malone, who is one of the original co-inventors of mRNA-based vaccine technology back long time ago. I don't know when, but don't look at his Wikipedia page because that has been completely slandered in terms of the reality of who Robert Malone, MD, is. The second one, Pierre Corey. And of course, Pierre Corey testified during a Senate subcommittee that was chaired by Senator Ron Johnson from my great state of Wisconsin, and was immediately labeled, a Republican shill and, discredited from that moment on. The guy's a, lefty. He's actually a very, very liberal Democrat traditionally, and he is completely outraged at the way this whole thing's been handled. He's a big ivermectin proponent as part of his work with the FLCCC, the COVID-19 Frontline Critical Care group. And then the third one is Geert Vanden Bossche from the Netherlands. I think he's from the Netherlands. I think he's Dutch. But he's actually a vaccinologist and an evolutionary epidemiologist. Now, the reason these three guys in particular were the voices that I sort of tuned into and still continue to tune into is because Malone understands the technology of the vaccine itself and how the mRNA-based vaccines are leaking. And the notion that these are not sterilizing to the point where it's going to create a herd immunity effect. You're not going to kill this thing. You're going to help it to naturally select, which is where Geert Vanden Bossche comes in. As an evolutionary epidemiologist, his perspective is all based on the notion that leaky vaccines will actually drive evolutionary progress much, much faster than a sanitizing vaccine that would normally kill off whatever it is you've got inside you. So all of this stuff about the vaccinated being the ones who are transmitting and getting sick and all that sort of stuff, but it's milder, that's actually creating a hotter virus. Now, It's snowed here in Wisconsin, by the way, Monica. So global warming is canceled. It's not, here we go. Here's the evidence. Right out there is my chicken coop. And one of the studies that I read was actually published by NPR in 2015, was around a virus very similar in terms of its evolutionary methodology that produced, I don't know the name of the bug, but it produced a phenomenon in chickens called Marek's disease, MAREK''S. Marek's disease, about 10 years ago, they began introducing a vaccine for chickens to help chickens to basically get rid of the Marek's disease in your chicken population. It produced exactly the opposite. It bred an ultra hot virus. And that's what I saw in my very history undergraduate appraisal of the mRNA vaccines was they're going to breed something hotter as a result of this, the leakiness of this, based on what Malone and Vanden Bossche were talking about. And then here's Pierre Corey, who's out getting COVID himself because he's treating COVID patients, trying to figure out what the protocols are. And then the notion that we have an innate immune system, which is able most of the time, almost always, to cope with and recover from this thing. And now we're going to introduce spike protein into that immune environment, which will then be the way in which we're going to attenuate our immune system memory in order to fight this thing. Now, we're getting off politics here for a second, but I want to draw it back to that because I think that if Trump had won re-election, it would be the Republicans screaming about mandates and pounding their fists and making us go do whatever it is they wanted us to do, because we can't have an economic recovery if we're all in lockdown. And if you can't have an economic recovery you can't get reelected, which is the number one job of every politician, is to get reelected. So anyway, that's my screed on the political implications of authoritarian vaccine mandates and political parties, and the fact that I think we would be seeing, if Trump had gotten reelected, we'd be seeing what they're seeing in the UK right now under Boris Johnson.
Probably true.
So I think that where we go in terms of choice making, how we cope with all of this, is back to this notion of, if I don't understand what I should do with enough certainty that I can act, and if I'm acting out of emotion, if I'm doing this because I hate Democrats, or I hate Republicans, or I hate, white guys, or whatever my prejudice is that makes me lobotomize myself in order to make emotional decisions, that's really where politics has been corrupted. And I think for us to survive as a society and as a civilization, we have to figure out how to take the emotion out of politics again. We have to figure out how to make arguments which are fact-based and reasonable. And you'll notice my t-shirt for today. My motto lately has been to make civil disobedience great again, by the way.
All right.
Because I think civil disobedience has really gotten very, tepid in this Facebook era. And what civil disobedience really means is, don't do what they tell you to do. I used to be a big Rage Against the Machine fan, and there's a very famous song where the chorus is, "F you, I won't do what you told me." And I was brought up on that, "F you, I won't do what you told me." I'm just not doing it. And so anyway, thoughts?
No, there's no way we can get back to having a viable society with everyone's participation and things to work the way that they should, without exactly what you said. People have got to think for themselves again, because there's no doubt about it. It's lunacy. I can't stand to look at Facebook and people's arguments that they make one way or the other most of the time, because they're not arguments at all, but they're a repetition of the mantra that, whoever's attempting to control their thinking wants them to spew.
Yeah.
And, if you scratch the surface, and me, I'm a provocateur a lot of the time with people. And I think one of the things that's probably been said about me is, you don't want to tangle with Monica unless you really have your ducks in a row, because I'll certainly have mine in a row.
Right.
Much like you. And that doesn't fly very well. And usually about 3 rounds into the conversation, whoever I'm having this discussion with, they'll shut down.
Yeah.
Because you box them in a corner and they don't know what to say. So they'll stammer. And it basically becomes, well, you just want to be adversarial, or they can't defend their position. It's very interesting. I'm sure you've seen this too with people that you've tried to have a logical discussion with. And when they run out of the talk points, they're done.
Yeah.
And then it's, well, just because this is the right thing to do. Okay. And you get into it with them about, well, what about your free choice? Do you really think you know enough about this to be making those decisions straight away? And you're starting to look at what the longer term effects are on some of these people who got vaccinated. The blood platelet problems, the pulmonary problems. I have a couple friends in Idaho, as a matter of fact, who very healthy people generally, late 50s now, who have had, I'm not sure which one of them never even had COVID, but his doctors gave him 3 months to live.
Oh my gosh.
He has a cardiopulmonologist in his house. He can't oxygenate his blood. And, they're trying to convince him that this is long COVID. And he's like, well, I don't have goddamn COVID.
Man, I'm sorry to laugh. That's terrible.
So my neighbor, same thing. He's a psychologist from California, and he didn't have COVID, and he got the vaccine, and now he's got all these bizarre issues with his blood, and he feels fatigued all the time. And I think you know where I'm going with this, but yeah. So
I think I don't think it's disputed any longer that spike protein is cytotoxic. And sort of what I interpret that to mean is it damages cellular tissue at a really molecular level. And to introduce spike protein into your system. The idea behind vaccines are you shoot them into muscle tissue so that the muscle can slow the uptake of that. And one of the guys I've been following in this, he's a big vaccine proponent, by the way, John Campbell from the UK. I would say he's got a very balanced opinion about it's not a vaccine mono strategy that's going to end this all. That there is a problem in the administration of a lot of these vaccines, which actually makes the position of go get your vaccine a completely idiotic point of view. And that is that most of the people administering the vaccine to you, you walk into your local Walmart and you go up to the vaccine or to the pharmacy and you say, I want to get my COVID-19 vaccination. The odds that the person who's about to shoot that into you has been trained in how to deliver a vaccine properly are less than 100%. I'll just say, I won't make a judgment, but I'll say that it's less than 100% just to be sure. And the reason is because you want to aspirate that syringe. And what that means, I've discovered, and again, history undergraduate here, stumbling along in the science, class, is you want to draw out a little bit of fluid from whoever you're administering this to. And if there's blood in it, you're shooting it into somebody's circulatory system. It's going to go straight to their heart and lungs. And that there is a very high risk of cardiovascular damage if this gets directly into your bloodstream right away and heads for your heart and lungs. So that's where I'm understanding that a lot of that vaccine injury is taking place is because people are not aspirating when they are being administered the vaccine. And as a result, it's going straight into their bloodstream and straight to their heart and lungs. And I think that's still happening. He's the only one I've heard mention it because he's a nursing professor. He teaches nursing in the UK. And he's like, I learned this when I was 18 years old. When I was 18 and I had my first nursing, experience, the first thing they taught me was to aspirate the syringe when giving a vaccination. Of course, you've got hundreds of thousands of people administering vaccines now who've never been trained to aspirate a vaccination. Anyway, screed over.
It's an interesting time, like you said. We have so many different things going on so many different levels with just about every element of our lives. That's just kind of what it comes up right now. I mean, you've got inflation, you've got what the Fed's doing, you've got all the money printing, you've got the instability there, the wild vacillations. The minute you talk about pricing risk accurately, you've got the COVID debacle here. I mean, you just keep laying one thing on top of another.
Let's talk about the money supply for a second, because the thing we've noted about the STEEPLED, contingency control factor array is that as you define your macro environment, these things overlap a lot. Social and political overlaps a lot. Political and economic overlaps a lot. And I think from the standpoint of who's in power, party in power, so to speak, from a purely political and even partisan political point of view, the party in power needs to have certain financial results produced for the people who are going to ultimately influence whether they do their number one job, which is to get reelected. And I think we're in a situation now with the Federal Reserve where if the Fed raises interest rates, as it should, during a period of hyperinflation, I'll go ahead and leave that word on the table. I don't think we're technically in hyperinflation yet, as described by economists, Keynesian economists anyway. But during conditions of rapid price appreciation, we'll call it, just to be a little more politically neutral, during rapid price appreciation, the central bank would raise interest rates, causing the economy to cool off a little bit. There's less debt being incurred as a result of the higher cost of carrying that debt. Of course, the largest debtor in America right now is the federal government, and as represented by us as taxpayers. I forget what my personal responsibility is, but I think it's like $250,000 or thereabouts. My household altogether is probably about $1.5 million or $6 million, based on me having a wife and 4 kids. So do I have $1.6 million laying around to, kick in to that, to pay off the debt? Of course not. Nobody does unless you're Elon Musk. And the point of all that is a lot of policy is going to be made to satisfy these short-term political goals of getting reelected. And I think the whole agenda behind the measure that just got probably killed, Build Back Better, is very, very representative of that. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you, is Build Back Better dead for good, or are they going to try and resuscitate that zombie in 2022?
I have no idea. I kind of thought it was sheer lunacy. I tend to let's look at the numbers, let's look at the facts on the ground, let's look at the real status of the corporations and the different things that are going on here. And, I profile companies daily. And it's just like I start looking at the debt. I start looking at what's really going on. The how vested corporate ownership is, how private equity is loading ever more money. Now I sound like Eric into, which isn't a bad thing because he's not wrong in that regard. And when a lot of people thought he was crazy when he was talking about this, but he's right. The amount of these structured debt instruments, the amount of debt being loaded into these companies, how many times these companies are being shuffled around and money stripped out of them. And this is what we've done, not just to American companies. Look in the UK, for example, you're going to get a few signals. How sustainable is this? Why is there all this money printing? What would happen if we just said tomorrow, hey, you know what? You're not going to have access to this ZERP money, through the Fed discount window or whatever. You have to pay for your money. We're going to price risk accurately. And, there's not going to be any more QE, or anything like that. The economies of the world would implode immediately.
Yep.
And the Fed Reserve, like so many people I think have said, what other bullets do these people have? They've already done the low interest rate thing, and they're about at the end on that. Wow. What else is there? And with that in mind, you look at, like we said, all these other things that are going on at the same time. And I'm going to coalesce this in here just to illustrate the sheer lunacy of the environment that we've created. Last night, there was a film that came on. I'd heard about it. And I mentioned it to you. And what is it called? Don't Look Up. Meryl Streep, Jonah Hill, et al. But black comedy, pitches to black, about exactly where we find ourselves. And when you sit back somewhat dispassionate and you look at it and you go, my God, while this is a dark comedy and this is exactly where we are.
Yeah.
And you just sit back and you look at it and you go, oh my God, it is this crazy. It absolutely is this crazy. Yeah. If you haven't seen it yet, please do. And I want to hear your thoughts, because this whole call could have been summarized by just telling our viewers to watch that film, and they'd know exactly what we're talking about.
I think I saw Leonardo
off the rails.
DiCaprio.
Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio, right? He's the scientist in it. Yes.
Right. Well, I won't spoil anybody's entertainment of that movie by blowing the plot for them. I will be watching that at some point this week. My family and I just started watching the final season 3 of the Lost in Space show on Netflix, and actually it was great. We had to watch the last episode of season 2 in order to figure out what was going on, because it was a year ago. And then my wife immediately, after she dried her tears, by the way, it's a good show. She begged the children to watch the first episode of the new season. So I recommend Lost in Space, but I've got Don't Look Up on my short list here too. I'll probably just watch it with the wife. Is it suitable for children under 13 or not?
Having no children, I'm not certain I'm qualified to make that assessment.
Great answer. That's a great answer.
I'm not certain that 13 years old, well, probably, as long as everybody's 13 and over, yeah, they can probably handle it because they're seeing this stuff. There's some foul language.
It wouldn't be the first time they've heard that sort of thing in our house, but we try and minimize that as much as we can. Well, I think the lesson that I'm kind of taking away from this for 2022 is, and that's, by the way, sort of what we're trying to do with this, everybody who watches this, is we're trying to look ahead to 2022. Here we are at December 27th, I think it is. And, it's the last week of the year, the week when almost nobody works, which is kind of why wanted to do this with you now, Monica, and with Eric, is we have a little time on our hands, and we can sort of leisurely set a time each day, and we sort of talk about one of these things and kind of, get each other's agenda out in the open. My agenda for 2022 around the political sphere is really, how are the Democrats going to save their situation in Washington? And I don't have a clue how they think they're going to do that because of the situation that they've sort of gotten themselves into. And, I don't know if the Republicans necessarily have a strategy either. I think they're just hoping that, all the legislature and the White House basically blow up in each other's faces. And I don't think that's actually very patriotic. I don't think that, hoping for the failure of an administration and a legislature is particularly American. As much as I am repelled by many of the characters involved here, I don't want to see them fail. That their failure represents the failure of the system that my children are going to inherit someday. And ultimately, I think that's why we need to get our hearts out of this and our heads back into it. That's what I hope 2022 will bring, is that we can more dispassionately divorce ourselves of the manipulative forces in our world, and the media being my favorite. That I think we've got to do that as a nation, or there are consequences that if we don't do that. I think the balkanization of urban and rural would be how I would trend this out. I think that if you live in a city and that city has a certain concentration of political points of view, you are going to want to leave. As they have, California is kind of our canary in the coal mine, right?
Well, I'm in Sun Valley, Idaho. Okay, so I was in Atkinson's, which is one of the grocery stores here the other day, and the big joke in Sun Valley as well. Last time, you remember, Sun Valley was one of the epicenters of COVID, as you know, because there's a lot of people from Seattle. Seattle was one of the hot spots when it first started taking off. Half the lots in the parking lot here are, I'm sitting right behind Sun Valley Lodge. My family owns a couple condos here, and have for a long time. But yeah, the amount of plates from everywhere else, to New Jersey, to Seattle, to wherever. Yeah, we're the COVID hatchery. Without question.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But to your point about, people moving and this, that, the nice things, on another note, I live in Boise, Idaho. Okay. So also, the epicenter of the housing bubble, last time and this time, by almost no one's argument, Boise has shot up more than almost anywhere else in America. Yeah. I think we've talked a little bit about why, and what's driven that, why Boise is an interesting thing still to me, but the amount of people that have poured in because of those political types of things, I think, because Idaho being what it is astounding. And a lot of the people that I've met that have poured into Idaho aren't necessarily the more liberal, progressive type factions of the California populace. They're people that align more with either more libertarian views or more traditionally Republican views. So to your point, that growth has slowed down. The housing bubble in Boise is clearly bursting, but up here in Sun Valley, I've met some people that obviously have some wealth. You have to have a lot of money to be sitting in Sun Valley if you've ever been here. Millions. It's the richest playground without any question. I don't think you'll be buying any condos here for under a few million. Let's put it that way.
Right.
That's kind of how it is. But I met this family the other day and they're like, oh yeah, we're just out of California. We're going to come up here. We're going to buy a property or something. And yeah, so it's just like, yeah, you could, I kind of was trying to gauge, listening to what her and her husband were talking about, why we were in line at the grocery store. And then we got to talking on the way out and she was asking me, you're local. And I said, well, I guess close enough. I grew up here, from the time I was 14, 15, my family moved up here. So, can I give you some dinner recommendations then? Sure. What do you want, Italian or this, that, and the next thing? And she's like, we're so looking forward to getting out of California. But yeah, it's happening around here. Idaho's exploded. And, because we're known as one of the reddest of the red states, as you can probably imagine. So to your point, but I'm going to go back to your other point because it's exactly right. And I'm going to tie this all together with a little bow and the film that we just referenced. just really draws it to a head that what we're doing right now, for any thinking person, is a farce. This cannot continue.
Yeah.
Unless, excuse me, I think I just lost video and I was coughing. Sorry. My power on my phone was letting me know that it's limited. But how much longer can this farce continue to go on before we address these existential issues across every domain? And it cannot be just money. And I don't want to give away the plot of the film, but it does bring into sharp relief that we try to even monetize the disasters that are coming toward us in ridiculous fashion.
Wow. Well, that's well said. And Monica, I am so thrilled that, you have joined me here to close the distance again on politics and the political control factor domain today. You good to come back tomorrow about 7:30 in Sun Valley? Talk about legal.
What are we talking tomorrow?
Tomorrow's legal. The L for Steve.
Oh boy, sure, yes.
And that rule of law.
Oh boy, I'm going to have plenty to say.
All right, well, warm it up. And for those of you watching right now, thank you for tuning in. Subscribe, like, share, all that jazz. And we'll be back here about 8:30 Central Time, 7:30 in Sun Valley to talk tomorrow. And tomorrow we'll be doing L is for legal of this steepled inventory. And if you want to look us up, Monica Nixon, you're on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'd be willing to entertain connection requests and all of that sort of stuff. If you want to find me, my name is spelled so weird, I should be easy to find. But we are in the process of launching a new platform that I want to get Monica and Eric both involved with here called Open Recon. And Open Recon will be the manifestation of some of these things that we're talking about to try and figure out how to divorce people of their emotions a little bit and to get a little bit more skeptical about reality and how their reality is changing so that they're not so palliative in their choice making choices about things that will make them feel better rather than things that will make them actually better.
And things that'll make other people wildly rich.
There you go. So thank you, Monica. Thank you, Eric, wherever you are. I hope you enjoy the day with your children. Monica, enjoy the day with your family. We'll see you back